Children have playgrounds and they have sandboxes and fun toys to play with. And the version of the adults playground is starting a business.
That's Andrew Young. After immigrating to the US, he got his cushy dream job in big tech, only to realize that it wasn't fulfilling.
The thing I struggled with the most at Facebook and Google is that I felt like I wasn't using my full potential.
So he set out on a mission to leave it all behind and became known as the Gatsby of New York startup scene.
I know it just on the outside, it looks like I'm just throwing parties, but there's a lot of work that goes into the parties.
Now, with his visa no longer tied to any employer, he's become a full-time founder himself.
Once I'd started thinking about it and telling people, I realized there's no turning back.
He opened up and shared with me the hard truths of being an immigrant founder, as well as how to get the press actually on your side and the key to building trust quickly with strangers. This is Andrew Young's founding journey.
Andrew, what's up, man? Welcome. Been a while.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'm excited to do this.
So when we met, I think you were at Google, and before that, you've been at Meta working in product. And, I did the Airbnb and Uber thing before jumping in and building Launch House. It's a huge transition for someone to go through, from the kombucha on tap and the ping pong tables to being entirely responsible for other people's paychecks. What are you loving about that? What's that been like?
The biggest thing is, I read this quote a while back that goes along the lines of, children have playgrounds and they have sandboxes and fun toys to play with, and adults don't. And the version of the adults playground is starting a business and being able to experiment with it, with the rewards being money, which is ultimately what, a lot of people are interested in. So it's felt like that exactly. I felt like I've been able to tap into my creative side and try things. And, I think the thing I struggled with the most at Facebook and Google is that I felt like I wasn't, using my full potential. It was kind of like I was just jogging really slowly, over a long period of time. And now I feel like I'm sprinting and I'm doing 100 burpees and doing crazy pull-ups. And I feel like I'm really tapping into my full potential. So I'll say that it's been really fulfilling and really fun and really creative in some ways.
Where you're becoming an Iron Man.
Yeah. One day I'll physically do that, but I'm not quite there yet. Maybe like a half marathon runner or something like that.
I guess what's the other side of that coin, right? Because I think for me, I had founded an agency before I went into big tech, and it was really, really different than doing a venture-backed company. Your current business is, to my knowledge, not currently venture-backed.
Mm-hmm.
What's the other side of that? What have been kind of the challenges of diving in, coming from big tech?
Yeah, it's really hard, and you've probably heard this so many times. It's really hard to turn it off from the perspective of your headspace, but also your personal identity. When you work for an Airbnb or Google, your professional personal identity is consistent. You're always known as the product person there, and a lot of people, they're sort of their egos and the self-esteems. Unfortunately, it's kind of tied to your professional identity, and so that's a consistent. And I think as an entrepreneur, if I have bad weeks, I sort of question myself and I think about my self-esteem. I reevaluate my self-esteem, and I have great weeks, then I feel better about myself. So that fluctuates so much, and it's really confusing at the end of the day.
What makes a great week versus a bad week?
A great week usually comes after a big project. So I recently did this founder conference, 500 people, and we spent months planning for that. And it was so cool to see it come to life. And, we did well. It did well as a project as well. And then so 2 weeks following that, I just wrote this high, and I'm I feel invincible. I feel like I can do something even bigger. But then, the flip side, all the bad weeks are 3 months leading up to it, where especially for an events business. So yeah, I feel like the good weeks usually come after a sale or a big win or a big project. And sometimes it feels I don't know if you remember the scene in The Big Short where Ryan Gosling closes a deal and he's in the gym. He's like, yes. That's what it feels like. It's rare, but that's, those are sort of the best moments.
Do you think you're better prepared to handle the good moments and the bad moments after having worked in big tech? Is one not necessarily a prerequisite, but is one beneficial to now doing the other?
When you're building a startup, it's easy to get heads down in your work and forget to take care of yourself. But Mark Health can help you optimize your wellness and performance. They've got a wide array of specialized lab tests that help uncover health markers that traditional primary care might miss. They offer everything from metabolic and cardiovascular panels to hormone assessments in ways that are designed to help you get a thorough understanding of your own health. Plus, you can easily order their tests online without having to deal with any potential pushback from your primary care provider. By identifying potential issues early, Marek can help you take proactive steps towards optimal health. Head to marekdiagnostics.com now to get started and optimize your health with precision testing. Use the code HOUT for 10% off your first lab order.
I think so. I think if I have a bad week, I worked in big tech. And so if I have a bad week or if I have a really bad week and I'm like, I'm not meant for this, then I'm like, oh, that's cool. I can go back to big tech. I can go back to like a big company. And so like, I'm like, what's the worst that could happen? I've seen all this content online about the best founders have no option. But for me, it feels more productive to have an option. So you can be more playful and have more joy and treat it a little bit more like a game versus if this was like life or death, then I feel like that wouldn't bring out, your best qualities and your best work.
Yeah, there's less desperation, but that lets you, I think, treat decisions more objectively. You're not making decisions based on need, like personal financial need. You're making them based on what's best for the business or customers.
Yeah. And I guess it depends. It kind of depends on the type of business you run. Like maybe if the best thing for your business is that you should spend all night coding and building something, then maybe that desperation is good because it just sort of forces you to focus. But, in my business, I think my main job is to meet people and to get them to come to my events. And so if that comes from a place of desperation and I'm like, please buy this ticket or I'm going to go out of business, then it doesn't really work.
Yeah, I don't think that's a strong sell.
Yeah.
I go back and forth on this because, sometimes I feel like I waited too long to dive in and become a founder. Like when I was at Uber, I took the job at Airbnb because I thought, okay, I'll get a different type of professional big tech experience before I'm ready. Right. But then looking back, I wonder if I was ready even before I was worried about that. Like, do you ever feel that way?
How many years were you at Uber and Airbnb? Like how many years were you in corporate big tech?
I was in total, it was a little over 4 years.
4 years. Okay. I was about the same for me, but I also had 2 years at some larger company that made telephones. Before that, I felt like I could have done it maybe 1 or 2 years earlier, maybe. But before that, I wasn't prepared. I didn't have like the skills. I didn't know how to, sell, or I didn't know how to influence people or manage relationships. So I needed at least like 3 to 4 years before I was ready to take the leap.
What can somebody who's in our shoes a few years ago do now to make sure that they are ready to take that jump? They're thinking about it.
I think it's like just spending time with a ton of like early stage founders, and maybe like at the seed or Series A level, maybe Series B, where they have a bit of traction and product market fit, and like I think once an institution commits a certain amount of money in your company, you've sold them. You've sold them on the vision and on yourself, and so like spending time around these founders and understanding, what skills they possess and, how they built their companies, and convincing yourself that you could do that as well. Once you've done that, you're like, oh, I can do that. Like I could do all those things. And there's no secret sauce that I'm missing. Then you're ready to take the leap. I've thought about this a lot. Like the Google and the Facebook, like analyst or product manager or a software engineer, maybe there's not much difference between their like skills and like an early stage founder's skills from what I've seen. I think the difference is just like the risk taking. And so if you took the cohort of like product folks I worked with at Google, if all of them quit and forced themselves to start a company, I think they would do fairly just as well as me.
Those day in the life videos from big tech, where you have like the product manager at Google or whatever other company, or they basically spend like 0% of their day actually working. Right? I think, you and me know that those are obviously exaggerated and they're trying to get clicks, but being a full-time founder, it is a big step up, I think, just in the amount of time and actual work that you do in any kind of desk job. Your to-do list, like it never ends. And so how have you sort of been able to still find time for the other parts of life as you've made the transition?
It's been hard. I'm really lucky that my girlfriend is like equally ambitious and understands, where I'm at right now in my career. And she was previously a founder and like raised money and institutional money. And so she gets it and she's supportive. I think that's like the biggest bucket in your life. And like your partner understands the health stuff. You just got to keep going on. And then, the fun personal stuff, that's the hardest part. Like, how do you make time for the fun personal stuff to ensure? I think there's been a few times in my, no, it's been like 10 months now, 11 months. There's been a few times where I'm like, is this worth it? There's so much work. And I know it just on the outside, it looks like I'm just throwing parties, but there's a lot of work that goes into the parties. So yeah, it's just having the discipline. And most people, here's where it gets really confusing. Most people don't have the discipline to work hard. But if you're someone who starts a company, you probably don't, it's more likely that you don't have the discipline to help yourself, take a break and enjoy yourself.
That's true. I've definitely run into that myself. I think you mentioned sort of being around other startup founders. And I would say that you actually have a leg up on a lot of other, new founders because you've spent the last few years really deeply integrating yourself into, specifically New York's startup community, but also the broader like online startup community. How have you been able to leverage that now that you are a founder to sort of hack the learning process for building something new?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, the obvious thing is like advice. So I just had coffee with one of the co-founders of Lyft, or the company Zimride that became Lyft. He's in New York visiting, and I just asked him questions for like half an hour. I'm like, what would you do if you're me? Like, what kind of business do you think I should build? What do you think I should be doing differently? All these, basic questions, and he's just seen it all from his peer group, and he's just seen, I think every path forward, almost every path forward for me as a business owner and entrepreneur is probably mapped out. It's been done before. And I just can't see what those paths are because like I don't have peers that have achieved that level of success. And so, talking to the people that have seen it happen and understanding playbooks is really helpful. That's number one. And then two is like, I guess when you're down, it helps to speak with another founder and know that, they share the same problems, and just going to the sauna together to, be emotionally be there for each other. But the first thing is, I think, and you probably have so much of this, but the first thing is so important. Just people who look at you and your type of business and your vision and being like, not in a discouraging way, but in a way being like, I've seen this happen in like these three variations to like a $10 million business or $100 million business. And here's like what you have to do. Just focus on these three things. And I think you can do it. And I've seen it happen like 80% of the time. And I think that's really encouraging.
Yeah, I would imagine someone like that definitely would have great advice. How do you get connected to the co-founder of Lyft, let's say?
One of the companies he's building now is around helping immigrants get visas. That was like a big passion thing for mine. It was really hard for me to get a visa. It's one of the reasons I left Google. I just didn't want to be on their timeline and sort of like have the silver handcuffs. And once I had solved the problem and helped myself get a visa to stay in this country and build a company called Andrew's Mixers that sponsored my ability to stay in this country, I wanted to help others do the same. And so I got connected with this awesome immigrant entrepreneur community, a lot of really amazing people, co-founder of Lyft, co-founder of Venmo, you might have met him too. Yeah, all these amazing entrepreneurs, and they helped me write my recommendation letter and that kind of thing. So we just had a common sort of mission.
I think we talked about that actually the first time we met in person ever. This was like a couple years ago. You were saying that it was tricky. You were in a tricky situation because you wanted to sort of start thinking about leaving and diving into your own business, but you had those handcuffs. Like, what happened between now and then? Like, walk me through the process.
Yeah. So I remember meeting with you in Williamsburg, and I was like, how do I make money? And I was like, what are all the ways I can make money? And then, and you were very encouraging because you were like, you do it like this, this, and this. It's been exactly what I said before. Like, it's been done. Someone's done it. And so you just kind of follow this proven roadmap. So thank you for that. That was really helpful. I think when I started to lean into it more, and when I started to tell more people that I was going to start my own company, that activated all these networks that I didn't know existed. And so people made introductions, and through those introductions, let's say I closed like pre-sales. And so when I had left Google on day one, I had a soft landing spot where I had revenue immediately, because I actually couldn't make money while I was at Google because of my visa, while I was at Facebook. And I couldn't do that thing where, oh, I'll make 100K from my side project before I quit, and I have this, soft cushion. I couldn't do that. It was a hard cutoff. So I thought my way of doing it was like getting pre-commits and getting LOIs and stuff. And that's exactly what I did. I could talk more about it, but it's like basically an event sponsorship model. And then once I'd started thinking about it and telling people, I realized there's no turning back. I told my parents, and I'm like, I'm thinking about quitting Google. And they're freaking out. It's kind of funny to see them freak out. And it made me want to pursue it even more. Yeah, it's telling people about it. It sort of commits you to doing it.
Why did it make you want to pursue it even more? That's an interesting comment.
I think there's like, I guess, a rebellious part of me where if they disagree, I'm like, I want to prove them wrong.
I can relate. Um, did you know that this was going to be sort of the end game for coming to the US in the first place, like when you first moved here? Or is it something that you sort of decided and were as you got deeper into the startup community?
I don't think I ever wanted to start a business. Like my dream was like, I just want to be like an executive at Google. And that would be, I'm sure that would be a dope life. And maybe that's still in the cards, a big tech exec or something, and have a big salary and have a great life. Pretty chill, I think, pretty chill. But it was more so through meeting like people like you and all these founders in my network where I realized, hey, I could build something. I think I could succeed at building, a small business, maybe, medium-sized business. And I would forever regret it if I didn't. And I could always go back to a safe place. I could always get like a job somewhere, but I would really regret just not doing it.
I think that's a realization a lot of people have the first time they start something, because it's kind of drilled into your head when you're younger that like, oh, it's super risky to go off on your own. But I mean, in my experience, like the downside is lower than a lot of people think, because the experience you're getting is so valuable for anything else you want to do from that point on.
I totally agree. I guess that the thing I question a little bit more is, do people like hiring former founders? Like, let's say, and I mentioned the scenario, which is like, I can get a job again, but people want to hire me. Like after, let's say I spent 3 years running a random events company, and I try to get a product role at Google, like would they want to hire me? I actually don't know. My gut is like, yes, I get a job, but probably not at the companies I worked at before. I don't know.
Maybe like running an events part of a business, like a company that wanted to expand dramatically into events and have it be in-house instead of paying someone for it.
Yeah, maybe. Or like wedding planning. I get into wedding planning. It's pretty lucrative, but
those margins are very nice.
yeah.
So for somebody who was in your shoes, they don't know kind of what visa to go after or how to do that. And you mentioned the other day the extraordinary alien visa. Like what is that? What's the process to go get that? How can people do what you did?
Yeah. And I guess first of all, if anyone is interested, please reach out. Happy to help and introduce you to the right people and write your letter of recommendation, if it makes sense. Yeah. So extraordinary alien visa, there's 8 criteria, 3 that you have to meet as a baseline. Ideally, you meet 6 out of 8 of those things to have a strong application. I don't remember all those categories at the top of my head, but something along the lines of, you need a really high salary. In my case, I took my salary from Google. That works as well. You're paid well. You need press. You need to have authored original material that is significant. So I had press, and I wrote some stuff for Business Insider. You need to be part of a exclusive membership organization, like YPO, for example. You need like letters of recommendation, and then there's probably like 3 other things along those lines. Like, the other one is like you have to have judged a case competition or something like that. So it's all these like random things. Like the visa stuff is so outdated, but it's all these random things that you should meet like 6 out of 8. And what an attorney or really good like immigration attorney will help you do is put together a case for those things. And for the things that you don't have, like press, sometimes you can pay a service to help you get those missing criteria. But for the O1, it's 6 out of 8. At minimum 3 out of 8, but you want like 6 out of 8.
Yeah, it sounds that sounds like an arduous process.
It was a lot of work. And it takes a lot of intention. I joined, but I took a bunch of random jobs and roles just so that I could make that criteria. I joined the managing director of Techstars Canada, gave me a role, connector in residence, just so I could like fulfill that. I mean, I obviously, Republic. So I did work, I did connect people, but I did a bunch of random stuff like that. I like talked to Columbia Business School so I could get a letter of recommendation. So you have to like actively, do stuff for the application itself. And, for most people, at least.
I think, a lot of great companies have been started by immigrants. Why do you think that is, especially in tech?
Yes, I saw that stat somewhere, like Sergey Brin and Google. I don't know. I think like immigrants have like a lot of hustle. I think that's really what comes down to, and like large chips in their shoulders. I was raised in China. I spent 20 years in China, and a lot of my friends were raised in China. And the way we were raised versus a lot of my American friends, not a knock on my American friends at all, but it's very different. Like some of my American friends were raised constantly being told that like they were loved and like there's a lot of unconditional love and that they were doing great and that they're proud of them. And I think that's probably the right way to raise a child. But in China, it's like, my parents would like hit me and stuff. And like, and that was a big thing. Like in Singapore, like they would hit people at schools. The teachers would hit their students with rulers, hit their hands and stuff. I don't know if I'm going off topic, but like random stuff like that. And Asian parents just really harden their children, like Southeast Asian and East Asian. And so when their kids come to like America, it's like massive chips on their shoulders. They don't think they're good enough. And the consequences for not performing are really high. As a child, if you get hit, as an adult, that's like, just scale that up. So yeah, I think a lot of kids are just, or a lot of immigrants just chips in their shoulders and they just have to succeed and prove themselves. And I think a lot of people build companies and want to be entrepreneurs because they're chasing not just like financial rewards, but like status and recognition and significance. And those are all the things that immigrants want and crave, most immigrants. So I think that's probably it.
The higher the stakes, the more you have to be focused and sort of perform at your peak capacity. Maybe unrelated, but one thing that you've done as you've sort of transitioned to become a founder that is definitely a signal that you're hyper focused and you're kind of all in is you've given up alcohol, right? Despite sort of being around it more than ever at your events. What was that specifically like a conscious decision because you're like, all right, I got to build this company, or was it just a unrelated thing?
It was somewhat related. It was, I used to be a really heavy drinker, like 10 tequila shots a night, heavy drinker. And I threw one big party at South by Southwest. It was like huge. It was like 2,000 people or something. It was open bar. And I just woke up the next day and I felt like, and I was like, hey, if every single weekend, and up to that point, every single weekend since like age, let's say 20, I'd been hungover and I'd like, that killed half my weekend, just gone. Right. Activity wise. And I was like, if I keep doing this, I don't think I'll be able to achieve my goals, like the goals I set for myself, like building a company and, all these career milestones. And so I was like, let me just give this a shot or else I'm going to regret it. It's the same thread of like regret. Let me stop drinking for a month and see how I feel. And also at the time, a lot of people I respected and looked up to were like sober. Like I remember meeting Sam Parr and he was like sober for like a decade or something or close. My friend Lori Siegel, she's sober for 13 years. And I was like, that's so cool. Like they don't need anything. Like they don't need booze when they go to parties. So I just wanted to try it out. And then I guess it kind of became identity, like external identity, which is good because people don't expect like me to pay for all the drinks at bars and at parties. So it saves me, more margin for the business.
Is it basically normal at this point? Because you've been doing it for so long now.
Yeah. It's pretty normal. I don't really crave it anymore, or like it's just not a part of my life anymore at all.
I have to mention our bet.
Oh yeah.
So you tweeted, I think this was like a year ago, maybe, that in under 5 years, less than 50% of adults in the US would be drinking alcohol. And we bet an omakase dinner on it. So a year later now, do you still feel that the sober movement will grow to that size, or should I start picking out the restaurant?
Honestly, to me, it's win-win. Like I get to have dinner with you, so it's a win-win. That was just like a random take. I looked at some data and I was like, and I just started talking to a bunch of people who, have had the same point of view as me on alcohol. And I was like, this could be a thing. So I'm still bullish on that.
Yeah, I'm bullish on it too. Would love to have dinner with you or win or lose, but
yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about the business and sort of the audience building that goes into the business. I think your business is so community brand and audience focused. You start on that before you even started on the actual rest of the business. You invested a lot of your financial personal capital into kind of cultivating relationship capital, right? You threw a bunch of these events kind of at your own expense before you even started taking on sponsors for them. Why put so much focus on relationships up front, and should more founders sort of follow that approach?
For me, it was really just solving my own problem. I was lonely. I needed friends. It was COVID. Things were all shut down. And I just needed to make friends. And so I did it in a very authentic way and in a really fulfilling way. That's why I think the events resonated with people, because they're like, this host, feels like he has the right intentions. And in a city like New York, it was just incredible how many interesting people I could meet just by hosting a dinner. At least coming from like Toronto or China, I'd never met the type of people met, in New York before. I didn't think it could turn into anything. I didn't think it would turn into a business. I didn't see the value of bringing together a group of Series A CEOs at all. But I just wanted to meet them and like learn from them. And I also thought just like fanboy, I thought it was cool. Meeting the co-founder of Duolingo was really cool. So that was it. Just like wanted to make friends. And I think for the first 2 years, that's all I told people. I got invited to be on the podcast and stuff and tell my story. And I was like, I just want to make friends. And these are just meetups for friends to make more friends. And then, a year ago, I was kind of like a hard pivot where I'm like focusing on founders, investors, and like tech professionals.
You've met so many people as you've been doing this, having these dinners and then bigger events. What's your best key for building trust with someone quickly when you first meet them?
For building trust, it really depends on the context, but it's the combination of a sincere compliment that shows that you've done your homework and that shows that you're curious and interested about what they're doing, sincere compliment, and like the right questions. I think if you have that 1-2 combination, you do that in the first 2 minutes, it's likely that you'll have a good conversation with them. And the pre-work leading up to something like that will prepare you for the rest of the conversation.
It's funny because that's a pretty low bar. It's a pretty easy thing to go out and actually spend a little bit of time to do that. But so few people do that, it does stand out.
Yeah. What I've realized is that like all types of people are so anxious at events and nervous to go say hi to a stranger. Even like last night, I was in this room. There were a few billionaires in a room, and I realized that like, nobody was talking to them. Everyone is way too intimidated. So if you just do that 1-2, you come in prepared and you go up to them and you're like, "Yeah, I admired what you did with this company. And I have like one really specific question for you. I read your book or I read, listened to your pod. Just one specific question. You'll immediately stand out. Even with a billionaire is probably like, they have people flocking around them and they get tons of attention. But even with that combination, I think like you'll be memorable.
So you've then used this IRL community to influence and build up your online presence, your audience online. And you've also used the resulting online audience to then draw more people to your IRL events. You have this nice flywheel going. How does that work? What's every like component that goes into that?
Building an audience is a full-time job, or at least it can feel like that when you're busy running your startup. But with AI making software easier to build, getting distribution is more important than ever. I can help. After growing my LinkedIn to over 40,000 followers and having 100,000 across all platforms, as well as a 60,000 subscriber newsletter, I know how impactful having an audience can be when you're building a startup these days. So I started Megaphone Studios, a ghostwriting agency specifically built for founders and their startups. Think of us like your startup's chief content officer. We turn your LinkedIn, X, or newsletter into a machine for lead generation, follower growth, and building your influence as a thought leader in your space. Our process is super lightweight for you while still delivering content that only you uniquely could write. And our plans are flexible with no long-term lock-in because we know how fast things can change at startups. Oh, and I brought my buddy Blake Emal along to help me run the business. He has even more followers than I do. So email me at hauk@megaphone.network. and mention the pod for a first month discount.
Yeah, so I guess I'll start with the URL stuff. I post a lot on LinkedIn and Twitter, sort of an open call. For example, founders to join me for dinner or for breakfast or at this event. And I'll specifically craft the post in a way that makes the event very interesting. And like it's sort of like proof that it's going to be worth their time. So for example, like I'm doing a breakfast on Friday and the room is full of 30 seed stage investors and founders, and founders have the comfort of knowing that they're in a room with their peers, nobody who's trying to like sell them stuff or solicit stuff, or nobody who's like way too early in their career where it's like a waste of their time to be in that room. And then we'll do the event, then the event is a whole thing. I try to make the event as effective as possible. And after the event, I'll post about it and post pictures and proof and get the people in the room to help me, to comment and engage. So there's like a ton of proof around it. And then I just keep running that, 6 to 8 events a month. And I think over a few years now, it's sort of built my brand as like the events guy who has like these curated rooms of like really strong individuals, but also like these very accessible, larger rooms where anyone is free to attend. So there's like, and that's why I kind of rebranded a little bit. There's like different formats for different people.
Yeah. I mean, let's talk about the rebrand a bit. The new name, I don't know if I can share the name is Fibe, right?
Yeah.
What is Fibe?
My first job ever, I worked at a company called Bell. They made telephones. They didn't make telephones. They're named after the man who made the telephone. They're like AT&T, but in Canada. And they had this product called Fibe Internet or Fibe TV. And I named it Fibe as a reminder to never work a job like that again. It was very like, I made a lot of friends and I'm grateful for my experience there, but it was just so unfulfilling and like just bad use of my time, I think. I left that company and I'd left the country and I come to New York because I was like, I want to reinvent myself because I wasn't happy with who I was while I worked there. So it's a reminder to myself and I thought it was kind of funny. And I talked to a few founders who had cool names for their companies, cool branding, and they're like, yeah, the name doesn't really matter that much. So like, all right, I'm going to pick Fibe.
Yeah, it's funny because I went through something similar recently where, my newsletter had been called Houck's Newsletter. And then with the launch of this podcast and with the launch of our case study library and everything, we renamed all of it to Founding Journey. So I moved it sort of away from my name intentionally. Yeah. Was that a factor too? You just didn't want it to be Andrew's Mixers anymore?
Yeah, there's two things. So one is that Andrew's Mixers didn't represent everything we did. Like we did conferences, we did CEO dinners, we did Lumos House, which is like a 3-day event series at a nice mansion. So Andrew's Mixers didn't represent that anymore. I also I created that name kind of as a meme. I didn't think it'd become a business, and it felt weird to introduce myself as founder of Andrew's Mixers. I wasn't so comfortable with that. So, and then the other thing was, like removing myself from it. We recently did a 30-person dinner. And Jacob, my chief of staff, he ran the whole thing. It was his dinner, and he hosted it under Fibe. So we're able to like scale, without having my identity attached to it.
Yeah, that gives you a ton of benefits, both in the short term and the long run. But yeah, I think Andrew from Andrew's Mixers, Andrew from Fibe. Andrew from Fibe sounds good. Let's talk about Lumos House. Just mention that. I had a launch house, you had Lumos House, 2 houses. You were really smart about it in a way that we weren't, where you only host these co-living residencies or experiences for basically like a long weekend, right? It's like a few days. We did it for a full month. I think the way you're doing it dramatically reduces the likelihood of inter-member conflicts and bad behavior by residents and things like that. But as somebody who's sort of built up your personal brand, and you're obviously on the radar of these sort of legacy media journalists having written stuff in Business Insider, do you worry about the potential downside of hosting these sort of things?
I do. I guess the difference is 2 things. Like one is it's not a sleepover thing. So it's actually just like day events and night events. But one is like not sleep. Nobody sleeps over except for the crew. And then 2 is like the events end at like 10:30 p.m. We're doing 2 events coming up, 2 Lumos houses, San Francisco and LA. It's a really small crew, like 50 max in the room. So if anyone like gets weird, I can like kick him out. And like bedrooms are closed. And so there's like no sketchy stuff going on with security. And I hope I'm doing the right thing, but yeah, I'm very, and like, I don't drink and I'm very vocal about it. So people tend to not drink that much. And I have a bartender who like is watching how much they serve. But yeah, the main attraction of those are usually the dinners. And then we start doing fireside chats. So in San Fran, we'll have Rajat from Lyft there. But Lumos House is more of like events that take place in a mansion over the course of multiple days, less of like a sleepover thing.
Yeah, the no sleepover is really smart. We had the sort of caps on bartenders and security for the stairs area and things like that. But there's still a possibility for things to happen. And I think the tough part is the more exposure you have, the more personal brand you have, the higher likelihood that you get hit with a hit piece, even if you do everything right. We basically had one employee who was upset that my co-founder had basically let them go, and a member that we had to kick out of our community after they brought gang members to the house. And so even if you do the right things in those situations, your position sort of can make you a target for someone who's feeling vindictive. So it's like, I hope you never have to deal with that stuff, but it sounds like you're doing all the right things to try and avoid it.
Yeah, I got advice from one of the really senior like GPs who's like who gave me some tips from your scenario. And he was like, always have like press ready to go, like our PR strategy ready to go. So I've been working on that as well. Just like, you can like activate it whenever if it happens. So I think I'm doing all the right things. Fingers crossed. It's just so much out of your control to an extent.
Yeah. You're the Gatsby of Silicon Alley now, right? So the press obviously likes you more than they liked us, but in all seriousness, building those relationships is tough, and you've done a great job of it. Do you think that like getting national PR, or I guess just online traditional PR, is something that more founders should invest in?
The only reason I wanted press in the beginning was for the visa. Is the only reason I wanted press, and now I think it's cool, so I chase more press because I'm like, I think it's cool. I think if it depends who you're selling to. If you're selling to an audience where press is seen as a significant proof point for competency, then I would focus on press. And I think that's actually a lot of business, consumer, like enterprise. For example, I have a friend who runs like an insurance tech company, and his buyers are all super old school, much older demographic, and they're like, oh, Forbes, amazing, we're in. Forbes 30 to 30, we're in. So it just depends on like who your target audience is. But I think press benefits most people. I might be wrong there, but all the businesses I've seen tend to be consumer, and press is beneficial.
What's like you mentioned your friend, what value have you gotten from, do people recognize you more, or like what's the ROI for the business that you've gotten from doing so much of it?
It helps me to sell sponsorships for sure. And it helps me, to get people into the room. If I invite someone, I'm like, hey, like, I'd love for you to come to this dinner. By the way, I've hosted a ton of these dinners, and the last one was featured in like, Fortune magazine. Just I'll try to say it in like least less boastful way. So it's definitely helped, and it's helped with like the personal branding stuff. Like when people introduce me, it's oh, this is the Gatsby of, and it's so cringe, but it definitely helps because people then will look me up after and be like, oh, this guy's like kind of legit, and we should give him $5,000 for his dinner.
Yeah, I think that that makes sense. I think that the tough part is that, the knock on traditional PR on social media is that traditional PR people are less pro tech than they'd want them to be, right? Like even if you work at TechCrunch, you're not necessarily writing positive things about tech. How do you find founders can get around that and they're engaging in this way?
I think the underdog sort of framing is strong, is good. And so you'll see, you're right. You'll see all these like traditional media, like kind of on, cause that's what gets views. They'll on like big companies and people with big brands. I don't think I'm anywhere close enough to having someone write a hit piece on me. Like someone tried actually, and it just failed. No one read it. I'll send it to you. It's like, you can see it. It's like tech party planner faces the realities of building a business. I don't think anyone read it except for me.
I never heard about it. Actually.
It was behind a paywall too. So literally no, my parents couldn't even read it.
It'll get more views from this podcast than it'll.
But like framing yourself as like the underdog, and you're starting from a place of like scarcity, and you've done all this stuff to sort of help others and to build community. And that's my whole angle. I'm just bringing people together. I don't charge for tickets. It's really hard to get on a business that like really is helping like young founders, and I kind of, it's not on purpose, but I kind of play into like the immigration angle a little bit. And that's a big part of my identity. I don't do it because I want good press, but I do it because I care about, that. And like the mandate of the business is to help people learn how to make money and how to build an awesome life and how to meet other people. And it's really hard to on something like that. So for any founder who's like, they want to avoid that, it's like find the positives of your business and play into the underdog angle and like work with someone to shape your story. I worked with this amazing woman, Lori Siegel. She helped Zuck form his story and Tim Cook back, a decade ago. And she helped me put my story together. She literally just sat down with me over lunch, and over an hour, she's like, tell me everything interesting about yourself. And by the end of it, she'd written a paragraph. And I was like, holy crap. Like, you make me sound so dope. And that was actually what led to the Gatsby article. She made that introduction. I didn't pay her. She wasn't a consultant. She was just a friend. So like sit with someone like that who like is good at storytelling, and maybe you want to hire a PR person, speak with for like an hour, 2 hours, just to put your story together. Because while I think a lot of tech founders are great at building product and doing their thing, the storytelling is like a whole different game that I haven't even begun to explore.
Wow, that sounds like a valuable meeting. I think especially less familiar with the storytelling side, having someone like that who can come in and help you find that narrative thread can be helpful for a personal brand or also for a startup.
Yeah, it's so crazy how like 1 hour, how much of a difference an hour can make. And it's, she came up with words I never knew that I could use to represent myself. And like part of it is like therapeutic too. Like I was like, oh, you make me sound way doper than I am. And like maybe that's the truth. In fact, that probably was the truth. And I was like, wow, I feel so great about this business. It's not just an events company, it's like this, and this. And I was like, that's cool. Everyone should hire someone like that and like do like a 1 to 2 hours and just like find another angle. Find like the best lens you can use to represent your business and your story.
How do you think about that lens on, traditional media channels versus social media, right? Because I think you do a really good job, as you mentioned, on Twitter and LinkedIn. You've also got the newsletter where you post on all your events, but also write like founder essays that are really good. How do you think about the lens you put forward in that sense?
I haven't had any like formal or professional help there, like social media branding and that part of what I do. So I don't know if I'm doing it correctly, but I will say like I've noticed like I've gone through my tweets in the past 2 years and I've gone through my blog posts and everything is like literally about, helping people lead better or write better or like perform better at their job. And, if, and those are all just proof points that I care a lot about this kind of thing. And so I think it's very clear what like my goals and my missions are. It's not, I'm not trying to sell courses or like I'm not doing this purely for profit. I'm not trying to squeeze money out of every single person I meet. It's more like I care because I spend all my time like writing about it. And I think my writing needs a lot of improvement and the Twitter stuff needs a lot of improvement. I need a proper like audit and evaluation so I can like revamp the approach. But for most part, like it's very clear what I care about. And I think if you simplify personal branding, it's people want to understand like who you are, what you stand for, what problems you believe exist in the world, and how you're solving those problems. And even if you're not writing your tweets that well, it's clear what your intentions are. So I would encourage people, like if you're a founder and you're not like, creating that much content, but you are in the business or vertical that can benefit from like social media content, start thinking about all those things you can write about and write down a list of, stories you can tell or tips you can give, all servicing like your broader mission. And ideally that's a mission that your business serves as well.
Do you think all founders should build personal brands, like even if they have very different businesses than you're on?
I don't think all founders should do it. There are probably some scenarios where a personal brand can either harm you or it can just take your focus away from building the business. I think I'd need like more time to sort of come up with specific scenarios. But for an example, like a situation where it can harm you is, verticals where it is untasteful to be loud about it. So maybe like for example, if you're a professional that works in like investment banking, it's just not part of the culture to like post about like how much money you make and how many hours a week you work. And it's just like part of that culture to be seen as a joke if you do that. So, or if you're building something that serves investment bankers, like using a founder example. So it's like, it's important to understand like, the cultures of the audience you're speaking with. And then in other scenarios, like if, it can just take away your time if you're building TikToks or you spend all your time writing threads. And I think there's an important distinction between like a creator founder, whether you're creator first or you're founder first. Like, so for example, I think I'm actually creator first, where I started all this by tweeting and LinkedIn, through LinkedIn, and I'm trying to build a business out of it. Whereas there are people who build companies and just want to tell their story. So yeah, it sort of just depends on like what space you play.
Yeah, it makes me think about one of the more interesting essays I've read recently, which was that taste is eating Silicon Valley, right?
Mm.
Where the tech and startup industry is sort of being taken over by taste and high quality experiences, like products like linear, rather than the sort of ship fast and break things, right? Do you think that's true? Are you seeing that in the communities that you're part of?
I read that essay too. She's I think Anu. She's
Yeah.
like she's an amazing writer. I love Reach. It's the only one of the only things I subscribe to. I don't know because I guess I look a lot at consumer products like meetup apps and group chats, and I'm hoping someone will build something substantial there that can like solve the problem I used to have and something that I can use to connect the people in my events and my communities. I'm always looking at these apps and one side I've seen beautifully designed apps amazing, user experience, strong founder, good onboarding flow. Like it just ticks all the boxes, but the product itself is just not that useful, or not that substantial. And I'm like, that kind of meets the taste requirement. It's a cool app. It's hot, it's trendy, and then then the retention's not good because people end up deleting it. Versus on a flip side, you see things that are ugly and do very well. And I think that's like the more common example. So I don't know if like it's taste alone. I think the fundamentals that essay seems to sort of discredit, like, maybe my interpretation is wrong, but like product fundamentals, like build something that people need and like find useful, and then maybe the taste and the stylistic elements comes, are secondary.
Yeah. It could also just be that we're like super early on that curve, right?
Yeah.
Of taste being a factor that people care about. So it might be like a more future looking perspective. So, okay, let's talk a little bit about events, right? So you obviously know more about events than, just about anyone else that I know. I had an events business in college. I've seen sort of the the highs and lows of that business too. From a founder's perspective, should founders be out there hosting events? Like, what kind of founders should be hosting events? I guess is a better question.
I see events as a founder. I would try to understand like what events can do for the business, or for myself. And so like if you want to host events because like you just want to meet other founders and like you need friends and peers, then I think that's a good reason to do it. If you want to use events as like a, let's say, consistently, I think like anyone should consider, any founder should consider hosting a one-off event once a year, once every 6 months. That's fine. It doesn't take that much time and planning. If you're doing like a launch event or something, but let's say consistently, like monthly or more. So if you want to host small dinners to meet other founders, to just for emotional needs and to make friends, I think that's fine. If you want to use events as like a B2B sales channel, and you're like selling to other founders, or like, you're selling to engineers at Google or something like that, then I think, that could be a good use of your time, with the assumption that it's your team hosting it, not you like spending your time doing event planning and organization. But if your company hosts it, I think, I've seen events to be a very strong B2B sales channel with some verticals. But if you're doing it consistently to build your brand, I don't think that's a good idea, especially as an earlier stage founder. Like a personal brand or like company brand, I think you should be focused on more on like the conversion to get prospects in the room. And like you shouldn't be throwing parties every month just for the brand.
So obviously it's better for especially early stage startups if these events can be sponsored, right? If they can partner with other people as well. You're the master at this. What can founders do to make an event attractive to sponsors?
Oh, to sponsors. So sponsors will sponsor an event. From what I've seen, they'll sponsor an event for two reasons. One is to make you happy and just to be a part of your network and like to do you a favor. And so typically you'll see this from like law firms. Like for example, if you have like a law firm or retainer and they have a lot of business from you, and one day you're like, hey, I'm doing a launch event. I need some help covering the costs. You put in like 5 to 10K. I'll probably do it as a retention tactic to keep you happy. In my case, I don't work with any large law firms, but people put in a check for the event just to sort of like get into my good graces, as weird as it sounds, and to get maybe some introductions down the road. And I've done that too. Like I've sponsored an event. I sponsored an event last night where I'm like, I love this individual and like I want to give back, but also I kind of want to like tap into like their network a little bit if they have buyers in the room, like specific prospects. And so to effectively sell to them, you should be very clear in who's in the room, as clear as possible, as clear as you can get. For example, I have 20 deep tech B2B founders who've raised between $3 and $5 million, with 10 employees, with 10 to 15 employees, and like 3 engineers on payroll. That's a very specific sponsor I'm thinking of as I say that. But that's an example. The more clear you can get, the better. And then your job is to like just fill the room with those folks. But I do think like if you're a venture backed company and you have deep pockets, it's probably not worth your time to go out there and sell sponsorships. That's a whole business on its own. You should probably just pay for the dinner if it's like $3,000, and just take it as like a cost, customer acquisition cost, versus like spending a week or 2 weeks mastering the event and like the logistics, and then like selling sponsorships and doing like 50 sales calls. Probably bad use of your time. So I would just pay for it, to be honest. unless you have like a law firm that's like, yeah, we'll cover like 5 of your events over the year.
What about the other side of the coin? If I'm a founder, someone's coming to me wanting to do events and wanting me to sponsor them. At
Mm.
what stage should I start to think about that? How should I evaluate if it's a good opportunity or not?
With an event sponsorship, I guess the flip side of that is like if there's an individual that you want to build a relationship with because like you want to sell to them or you want to tap into the companies their network and sell to those people. So like a very specific reason, then maybe it's worth like sponsoring just to build a relationship. I don't know if that's like a bad take, but that's how I've done it. And that's how I think through things. And then the second example of conversion, if it's anywhere from like 3 to 5K, let's say if you're a founder that's raised like $1 million, it's really, it's a really small piece of that $1 million and you're testing a new acquisition channel, I think it's worth giving it a shot. Now I would do it well. And like what I would ask for if you're sponsoring a dinner is like, you get to be in the room, you get the emails, and you get to give opening remarks and talk a bit about your product. And the event has to be very creative. Then I think it's worth trying as an acquisition channel, just because I've seen it work so well for my sponsors. And if if it works well, I'll just like put more money into it and like scale that channel.
I think kind of the third and final side of the coin is like as an attendee, right? As a founder, you sort of get, if you're chronically online like I am, you sort of get inundated with these invites to various types of events, conferences. But there's this inherent conflict between spending time on that and on growth and on building the product and on the rest of the business. I see some people kind of fall into the trap of like doing all of the conference circuit and the events, and they're sort of like playing founder more than being a founder.
Mm.
How do you make sure that you stay on the right side of that?
I think the short cop out answer is that if you're like a serious founder, it should be pretty obvious. Like you should know why you're going to so many events. And like I know some very serious founders who go to a lot of events, but they join these founders dinners because, for example, at my founder dinners, everyone stands up and introduces themselves and they sell to other founders. So by going to one of these, dinners, you that's like it's a sales thing for you. I know. I think if you spend all your time like going to events like 3-4 times a week and it's not for sales or it's not for fundraising, it's inevitable. And it's like, there's very little I can say to be, to convince you, to turn you into a strong founder. Like if that's your natural instinct, like go to all these events. And this goes back to, I guess, like more founder fundamentals, but understand, why you're going to so many events and like what the specific outcome you want from that is. If there's no specific outcome and you're going because like, oh, there might be like a cool person here, then it's probably a bad reason. And another thing you can do is like in a very polite way, you can ask like who's going to be in the room. So exactly who you can meet and like what you're going to say to them. And it's going to make it more mechanical, but it'll be a much better use of your time. And a lot of people have asked me that. And I won't like share names for privacy reasons, but I'll be like, these are the profiles that are going to be there. And usually that's good enough, for these founders. So yeah, ask ahead of time and like know exactly what you're getting into and try to find events that have like an out where you don't have to stay for like 3 hours.
I know when I've gone to your events a bunch of times at this point, especially the Junto Club series that you do, you send detailed emails ahead of time with like groups of people who you think should meet each other and they're all in the thread. And it makes it really easy to just get in there and actually make it valuable right away because you've done the work for me, right? I had somebody in one of those groups offer to become my co-founder. And
oh, cool.
I ended up not building that company, but the offer was there and the person was super legit. So how do you sort of engineer those serendipitous introductions? Any good stories around that?
People have like dated, people have like dated and like people have like angel invested. I this guy Junto that wrote like 200K checks into my friends' companies. Yeah, all sorts of like productive business and like social stuff happens, which is great. Yeah, it's funny. A lot of founders come like for the social aspect as well, which totally what it's meant for. I understand that like attending one of these events, no matter how accomplished you are, how confident you are, is still nerve wracking. Like it's hard to go in a room with 100 people and like introduce yourself. So I just try to make that process easier. So when you walk in, there's like, now we have like a check-in person who's like very friendly. You're assigned like a color. So, it breaks the ice. You see someone else with a blue sticker, you're like, hey, we're both in the same group. And then you can connect with people ahead of time. And in the past, how I've matched people up, I do these groups of 10, 10 groups of 10 for 100 people. I'll match together like either people with like common goals, like fitness is a common goal. And so I'll put them in the same group. So they have, I don't want them to be talking about that the whole time, but it's a good icebreaker, or like similar role profiles, like CEOs in the same group. And creator type founders in the same group. So honestly, there's no magic recipe. I just try to do my best of putting people in the same group that I think can get started with the least amount of like tension and small talk.
We were always trying to like guess what the commonality was, and that was the best part of the icebreaker, honestly. So nice work on that. For Fibe, have you thought about the path of fundraising? Obviously, the events model, typically not a venture-backed, venture scale style business. Have you thought about a way to position it that way? Is that part of a goal that you have, or is it, hey, this is a bootstrap business that you just really want to build?
I wouldn't fundraise for Fibe. I've been offered, like very fortunately offered, like angels and stuff, but I care too much about like freedom, my own freedom to like do whatever I want and like change the name to Fibe and like to do like a whole different event format and to like try these new business models. And like I mentioned the playground thing earlier, I care most about that. I don't even know what I would do with more money, to be honest. So maybe I'm definitely not the right person to run a venture backed company for Fibe. Definitely not for me. Just care too much about my like autonomy.
I love that answer. I think a lot of founders are feeling that way right now, even with software businesses. You've also been on the other side of the coin, the other side of the table with my old lead investor from our seed round, Launch House, Jesse Middleton at Flybridge. And you guys have started, along with some other great folks, Next Wave. Tell me about Next Wave, and do you see yourself going full time on VC in the future? What's the ambition there?
So Next Wave is a pre-seed fund that's backed solely by Flybridge, and it consists of I think 10 or 12 sort of like partners who have the autonomy to write checks and decision-making power on a specific check size. It's a smaller check size than normal. It's all sort of, veteran founders, except for me, but like most of them is like veteran founders and like executives who want to learn more about VC, and this is their taste. This is their way of getting into it. So, Lindsay Kaplan, the founder chief, is in it, and then like Guy Goldman for Brex. So it's a really solid group of like operators, ex-operators. And, I've learned a lot about like how to evaluate companies because we get to hop on a call with Jesse and his team. The thing I don't like about VC is like so much of it is saying no. And I'm so used to saying yes to founders and like inviting to the events. And like, my whole mission has been like helping people make friends. It started with that. And now it's like helping people learn, from more experienced founders. I'm doing the summit on the 25th, which you should come by the way, if you're free. And it's like got the co-founders of like DocSend and Chief and Vemo, and they're just speaking to 100 founders. It's a very curated room. And so that's been my whole mission. And now I'm getting all these calls and like saying no. And honestly, it's really draining. And like I have some founders that I haven't responded to in 3 weeks that I feel really bad about because I don't know how to say no. So I don't really like it that much, to be honest, but still learning. I'm still learning. I like the idea of how like horizontal you can go and how broad you can go to learn about these new industries, but I don't like the actual act of like saying yes or no.
Yeah. You say no way more than you say yes in VC. Yeah, it's tough. It's tough to say no.
Yeah, especially if like they're your friends,
Right.
and I had founders who've been to my events for 2 years over like 15 events. And I was always like, I'm going to help you. I'm going to help you. Like, you're an awesome individual and I'm going to help you. Like, I didn't say I'm going to help you like raise money, but I was like, I'm just going to help you as a person because like, I think you're awesome. And then they were like, oh, like now you're an investor. Like, do you want to invest? And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
you said you would help me.
Those are really hard conversations to have. Like, you do want to help them. You actually do. But an investment decision is different. It's different. So no full-time VC in your future. You're a founder for life.
Not near future, but I'm still like trying to understand like the career path a little bit, let's say a solo GP. I've seen some really interesting business models that I think could be really fulfilling. For example, there's the Lobby Capital, and they have an events business and they have a fund. So it's kind of like money, imagine like Money 2020. The guy who runs it also has a fund. It's like, because, the event business is your cash flow business. And like, because you have so many awesome people in the room, you can leverage that for deal flow. Like that to me, like kind of goes hand in hand. So I want to explore that a little bit more, but yeah, so far it's like the VC stuff I won't say it hasn't been fun, but it's been a little bit unexpected.
Anything unexpected on the founder side?
Honestly, everything has been unexpected. I didn't think it would be this much work. Like 6-7 days a week. I was like, oh my God, way more than I thought it'd be. Like I haven't had a weekend in a while, but it's also like, It reminds me of like when I was addicted to video games and I loved playing and I could play all day, but then I would feel like shit after because I was just staring at a screen for too long. It's like the same exact feeling. I could work all day because it's so fun, but I would just feel like shit after. And it, honestly, like I know this is kind of contradictory, but besides the volume of work, it's been like a little bit easier than I thought. Like sales has been a little bit easier than I thought. And maybe that's because I've spent the past few years building the brand, but like the B2B sales thing has been, and I'm selling to like these large enterprises, like some like public companies, but it's been like a little easier than I thought. I think maybe because my contract size is smaller and they can just put it on the credit card.
Yeah, I think you did the right work up front too. And I think more founders, as they're thinking about jumping into something,
Mhm.
rather than just jumping into the first thing they see right away, maybe take some time and build up that personal brand, build up that awareness of who you are and what you're doing, what you care about, like you did. Because I think it's a huge asset for you.
Yeah, I think that's right. Like building your credibility and trust. And so that's why, on the theme of like big tech to founder, you get a lot of I've seen a lot of big tech execs that leave to start companies and they have so much credibility from their network
Right.
when they leave that it's so much easier for them. And it's hard to do that if you dropped out of school or, if you're just 1 year of working at some random company and then, so the credibility piece absolutely helps a lot. And it's also like solving a real problem. Like I didn't sell until people were begging to buy. If that makes sense. Long before I started the company, sponsors came to me and were like, can we please sponsor this? And so maybe that was like a sign of like small scale PMF, but
Yeah, it's event market fit, right? Well, okay, we have a couple little rapid fire outro questions I like to do with folks. You up for that?
yeah, let's do it.
Cool. Okay, so first one, who's an investor that other founders should take capital from other than yourself and Next Wave?
I think it's important to take money from an investor that can offer more than just the money. Maybe that's an obvious statement, but if an investor has deep expertise in the space that you're building in, or, more of what I've seen, which is if an investor has distribution and that they have an audience and they can, for example, I think Rex Woodbury, it's a big newsletter. He just started a fund and he talks about his companies in such an organic way where I'm like, I click on almost every single company he mentions. That's like immediate, that's your go to market. You can just get featured in their tweet or their newsletter. So any investor, I'm biased toward investors with large networks, with influence, and with distribution. That's probably my instinctual answer.
What's one thing that you would change about the startup world?
As much education as there is in the space already, like you have conferences, which by the way, most of the conferences are kind of useless. It's just the sponsors paid to speak on the stage. They literally pay money to speak. That's why I want to do my thing, on October 25th. There's not a lot of good material on how to get stuff done. And you're doing this, which is great. It's like how to raise a seed round and how to build a company and things you should look out for. And if you get really specific, it's like, if you're going to raise a price round, things you should avoid. And like, I feel like there's so much noise. And so I think there should be more transparency from founders who are open to being vulnerable and revealing like the true behind the scenes. And I feel like I've talked to founders who like posture and they're like, oh, I did this, this, and this. And really those weren't the drivers behind how they achieved success. And then I've talked to other founders who were really honest and been like, here's what we did really well. And here's where we messed up. And I think we need more of that. Nobody ever likes talking about where they messed up and where luck played a role. So I'd love to have more of those conversations.
Yeah, that's totally true. That's why over the summer I interviewed, 60 founders who've raised money and we wrote case studies about every single one of them. And we've sort of packaged them up under this new founding journey brand.
That's great.
And just read them. People are super candid because, it's not totally public. It's behind a paywall. And so they know they're just talking to other founders.
And I've noticed like a lot of founders who've like shut down their companies are obviously a lot more honest. And that's where you can get some of the best insight on like what you should have done differently.
Yeah.
But nobody talks about shutting down their companies. There are actually startups now that help founders shut down their companies. It's kind of intriguing. Venture-backed companies.
I forget the name of it. Ryan Hoover sent me one when he was investing in it. I forget maybe it was just called Sunset. I'm not sure.
SunsetHQ.com.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Next one. What's your number one piece of advice for a first-time founder?
Find a mentor, find someone who's done it before. And, you can listen to them, but you're not going to do what they tell you to do because like, we're stubborn people. You're going to like learn it for yourself, but just find someone who's like done what you're trying to do before.
I love that. I think more founders should do it. You can see around corners. Okay, last one. This is a Peter Thiel one. I love this question. What's something that you believe in? Doesn't have to be startup related. It can be something you believe in that most people disagree with you about.
I'll go back to what I said earlier, that I really believe there's a very minimal skill gap between that associate at Google and like the founder.
Mm.
And if you're someone working like a tech job and you manage to get in, you're probably at a certain level of competency and you're wondering if you can do it. I think you should try because you surprise yourself. Honestly, today I built, I built this events company and it's done like pretty well. I was, making a lot more than what I was making at Google.
Mhm.
And I go back to see my colleagues there and I'm like, there's no difference between us. Like you're just as competent as I am. Some situations I'm like, I still feel like you're still way smarter than I am. And if you just like took the leap and like just tried it, like you could just get, you could build a business that's, whatever, doing just making you more than you're making now. So I think there's this belief where people put founders on a pedestal and like they've done something extraordinary and they have, but I think you could do it too if you just took the risk.
Well, give yourself some credit, man. You actually took the risk. And I think it takes some
That's fair.
intelligence to see that that's actually a good and like a rational move. A lot of people don't see it that way.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, I appreciate it.
Well, cool. Andrew, I think a lot of people probably already know where to find you, but where should people go online to find you, to follow you, to get involved in your events, all that stuff?
Andrew Young on LinkedIn. My handle's tagline is I build tech communities. So LinkedIn is probably the best place now. I don't know what's happening on Twitter. There's so much spam everywhere. So go on LinkedIn. I'm going to be posting more there.
Cool, man. And people should subscribe to your newsletter too. All the events, you post them in there. That's where I go to sign up for them, check what's going on. So,
Yeah.
Cool. Well, hey, thanks for coming on. It was great to chat, catch up, and maybe I'll see you on the 25th.
Yeah, I'll see you soon. Thanks for having me.
Of course, man.
Thanks for listening. I write up my main takeaways from every conversation and make them available to all of our members at foundingjourney.com, along with a bunch of other perks and more content. If you found this conversation valuable, subscribe to Founding Journey on Spotify, YouTube, Apple Podcasts, or whatever your favorite podcast app is. I post a new episode every Thursday. Also, consider leaving us a rating or a review. As a brand new podcast, this is the best way for us to get out there and founders to find us. See you next time.